Welcome back to the Ing-Lit Hit. We're finally back looking at Ozymandias, and today it's the third and fourth lines of the poem. Why is it important that the shattered visage and legs of stone stand in the desert? Well, it is the setting that is so integral in implying moral weight to the poem. Stephen Hebron, in his article for the British Library, says this: "The poem does not end with a moral truism, but with the simple, striking image of the desert sands." Well, that image is established here. The sand is an arresting metaphor of the passing of time. One thinks of an hourglass. However, it is also transitory. It moves about the place, doesn't it, in the slightest of breezes, and there is no controlling its spread. Shelley is purposefully implicit, both in style and content, a subtlety that hints that art, his art, is less transient, more permanent than dictatorships and empires like Ozymandias. Yet, as we've already established, even the poem is fragmented and displaced, not only in terms of diction and syntax, but also with regard to its form. It is a sonnet, but not a conventional one. It is a sonnet in the sense that it is a 14-line poem and metered in iambic pentameter. But firstly, this meter is not wholly consistent. Shelley disrupts the rhythm in lines 11 and 12. Secondly, the rhyme scheme is unusual. It links the first half of the poem, those first 8 lines, an octave, with the second half, those 6 lines at the end, a sestet, by gradually replacing rhymes with new ones, rather than following the traditional structure. We're left with a fragmented rhyme scheme that departs from convention: A, B, A, B, A, C, D, C, E, D, E, F, E, F. Finally, while a Shakespearean sonnet might usually end with a rhyming couplet, this one does not. It seems Shelley could be distorting the ordinary in order to defy the establishment. Nothing human is everlasting, after all. The ah sound running through these 2 lines, which is prominent throughout the poem as a whole, reminds us of the distant origins of a thought. Stand in the desert, near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered. We can audibly gauge a unity between concepts, a cohesion that carries throughout. But crucially, it is vague, and almost like the level sands stretching far away, we are led to see the statue, and possibly the poem itself, as fleeting. It could be said that Ramesses II, or Ozymandias, is stuck, half sunk as he is, absorbed by the millions of grains of sand that envelop him. But alternatively, I like the image of him floating away, a vague memory caught in an eddy of wind and rushed on, exiled from popular culture in any meaningful sense. Either interpretation leads us back to the idea of ephemerality of human power, whether that's imperial or artistic. The facade of stability is coupled with the brutal reality. Line 3 begins with stand and ends with sand. 2 words that rhyme, they look and sound very similar, and yet they almost summarise the fate of Ozymandias. In Ecclesiastes in the Bible, the writer speaks of the meaninglessness of this life, in comparison to the eternal life offered through Jesus. It says, "All go to the same place, all come from dust, and to dust all return." Here, Shelley's deliberate use of the word stand, he knows that it is a superficial stand, is satirical and self-deprecative, when the same line closes with the word sand. This almost harks of the Conservative 2017 election promise of strong and stable government, and the satirist's reply of weak and wobbly reality. Instead, here, Shelley crafts both in order to make a point about the inevitable diminishing of human power over the course of time. We are led to think this already because the caesura, the ellipsis or full stop, depending on which edition it is, cuts us short from the security of the stand in the desert, while the continuing enjambment, cutting short each line, reiterates the idea of stagnation and fragmentation. In line 4, This stock-still paralysis is exemplified by the visual representation of a half-sunk face. It is ironic that the ruler had insisted on the inscription, "Look on my works," when the statue, if statues could be said to look, is blind, or at least visually impaired. It's half-sunk. As mentioned previously, the continued ah sound through to shattered half echoes of the fragmentation in the form of the statue, and indeed of the poem itself. We see this too in the description of the statue's face. Frown, shattered and wrinkled, speak of a contorted face, one frozen in time. I will comment on this in the analysis of line 5. But it is important to note that the expression is static. Frozen in time, the message it gives is established, its meaning irredeemable, set to be interpreted in whichever way we choose. Ultimately, Ozymandias the king has lost control, while the recipient or reader of this poem is left to determine his fate. His hubris, or arrogance, is laid bare, and as this analysis has already proven, the history books do not look on him favourably. His arrogance is what incapacitates him. If you like this video, please subscribe below.